Right now, inside your digestive system, something is happening that most people spend their entire lives trying to fix and never fully do. The bloating that arrives without warning, the irregularity that has become so predictable, it has stopped feeling like a problem and started feeling like a permanent feature of being you. The low-grade digestive discomfort that sits in the background of every meal, every afternoon, every night, when you lie down and feel the system that is supposed to be silent making itself known. The energy that should be there in the morning, but is not quite. Partly because the gut and the brain are connected in ways that most people never fully appreciate. And a gut that is working against you is a body that is dragging. You have tried things, probably expensive things. Maybe a probiotic supplement that helped for a while and then stopped. Maybe a dietary overhaul that worked for a month and then fell apart. Maybe a gut reset protocol from someone on the internet who seemed to know what they were talking about. And you are still here, still dealing with the same system that has been quietly underperforming since somewhere in your 20s or 30s, when the modern diet and modern stress and modern medicine collectively began doing what they do to the human gut when left unchecked. Here is what nobody is telling you. The solution is not new. It is not a breakthrough. It is not a clinical trial result that will be available in 18 months once the FDA reviews it. It is sitting in a small glass jar on a shelf in almost every Asian grocery store in the country. It costs approximately $1. It has been used in Japan for over 800 years, with documented, consistent, observable results that modern gut science is only now beginning to fully explain. And it was forgotten in the West, not because it does not work, but because it cannot be patented, cannot be manufactured at scale with a significant markup, and cannot be sold for $50 a bottle the way the probiotic next to it on the pharmacy shelf can. It is called Umeboshi. And by the end of this video, you will understand why a single wrinkled, intensely sour, bright red pickled plum is one of the most biologically sophisticated gut interventions ever developed. Why Japanese samurai carried it into battle as their primary field medicine. Why Japanese monks have been eating it every morning for 8 centuries as their first act of the day. And exactly how to use it starting tonight to begin doing what 800 years of consistent Japanese use suggests it does, fixing the gut that your modern life has been quietly breaking. Stay with me through all 7 sections because this is not a single mechanism story. Umeboshi works on the gut through several simultaneous pathways, and understanding all of them is what separates the people who get results from the ones who try it once and decide it tasted too sour to bother with. At the very end, I will give you the exact daily protocol, the same one the Heian court aristocrats used in 794 AD, that Japanese schoolchildren eat before class today, and that researchers in Tokyo are actively studying in 2025. Let us begin. Before anything else, let me tell you what umeboshi is and is not, because the translation causes immediate confusion for almost every Western person who encounters it for the first time. Umeboshi is typically translated as pickled plum. This is accurate in the same way that describing miso as fermented paste is technically accurate, which is to say it is correct about the surface and completely silent about what makes it remarkable. The fruit itself is not a plum in the way Western grocery stores use the word. It is more closely related to an apricot, firmer and more tart. And in its raw state, it is actually mildly toxic, containing compounds that are broken down and neutralized during the fermentation and curing process. The pickling process that produces umeboshi is therefore not merely a preservation method. It is a biological transformation that converts a fruit the body cannot safely eat in large quantities into one of the most medicinally documented traditional foods ever produced. The production process matters because the mechanism is in the process. Fresh ume plums are harvested in early summer, typically in June when they are firm and green. They are layered with salt, typically between fritzi. 18 and 20% by weight of the fruit, in a ceramic crock or barrel. Under the weight and pressure of this salt, the yuam release their liquid, which creates a brine called umezu, plum vinegar, that begins the curing process. This brine is itself a significant product with its own documented health properties. The plums sit in this salted environment for approximately 1 month. After the initial curing, the plums are typically spread on bamboo mats and dried in the sun for 3 days during the hot midsummer period. This sun-drying step is not merely aesthetic. It concentrates the fruit's compounds, kills surface microorganisms that might cause spoilage, and triggers a specific set of biochemical reactions that further develop the bioactive compounds that make umeboshi medicinally relevant. Many producers then return the dried plums to the umezu brine for additional aging, sometimes adding red shiso leaves whose pigments and compounds infuse into the fruit during this second curing period. This extended second curing, lasting from weeks to years, is where the polyphenol compounds that produce the documented antimicrobial activity concentrate to their highest levels. The result of this multi-stage process, when done traditionally and without the artificial coloring agents, sweeteners, and accelerants that cheap commercial production uses, is a fruit that has been fundamentally transformed at the chemical level from what it was when it came off the tree. What you eat when you eat a properly made umeboshi is not a salted fruit. It is the concentrated product of a months-long biological process that has converted, concentrated, and made bioavailable a range of compounds that your gut has been waiting for and has not been getting from anything in your modern diet. The difference between traditional and commercial umeboshi is critical and almost never discussed. Commercial producers use artificial red coloring, synthetic citric acid, and sugar to reduce production from months to days. These shortcuts reduce bioactive compound content proportionally. A jar of cheap commercial umeboshi may contain almost none of the compounds this video describes. Look for 3 ingredients only: umi, salt, shiso. Umeboshi contains one of the highest concentrations of citric acid found in any food on Earth. Higher than lemon, higher than lime, higher than any citrus fruit that Westerners commonly consume. And citric acid, in the concentrations umeboshi delivers it, does something to the gut and to the body's energy systems that is so fundamental and so underappreciated that explaining it will change how you think about why you feel the way you feel after eating. You may have heard of the Krebs cycle, also called the citric acid cycle, from a biology class at some point in your education. The Krebs cycle is the primary cellular energy production mechanism in the human body. It is the process by which your cells convert nutrients from food into adenosine triphosphate, the actual molecular currency of cellular energy that powers everything from muscle contraction to brain function to the peristaltic movement of the gut wall. The Krebs cycle runs on and produces citric acid as one of its central intermediary compounds. This is not peripheral to the mechanism. Citric acid is architecturally central to how your cells make energy. When you consume high concentrations of exogenous citric acid through food, you are providing your cells with a direct substrate that can enter the Krebs cycle at a step that bypasses some of the upstream processing that other energy substrates require. Your cells receive an energetic input in a form that is immediately available to the cellular machinery that needs it. The energy production is not increased dramatically, but the efficiency and the smoothness of the cycle is supported in a way that has downstream effects on every system that depends on cellular energy, including the peristaltic muscles of the gut that are responsible for the motility problems underlying the majority of common digestive complaints. Poor gut motility, the failure of the gut wall muscles to contract in the rhythmic, coordinated waves that move food through the digestive tract at the correct rate, is at the root of a significant proportion of what most people experience as chronic digestive problems. Constipation is low motility. Certain types of bloating are caused by food sitting and fermenting in a gut that is not moving it along efficiently. The sluggish, heavy feeling after meals that so many Western adults experience is partly a motility problem, and motility depends on the cellular energy of the gut wall muscles, which depends on the efficiency of the Krebs cycle in those cells. To put the citric acid concentration in concrete terms, a single umeboshi contains approximately 5 times the citric acid of an equivalent weight of lemon juice. That concentration is enough to genuinely move the needle on Krebs cycle substrate availability, in a way no other commonly available food does. Umeboshi's extraordinary citric acid content supports the energy production of the cells that move your gut. This is why Japanese folklore, which turned out to be describing a mechanism that biochemistry eventually confirmed, consistently attributed umeboshi with the property of accelerating digestion and relieving the sluggish, heavy feeling after heavy meals. The historical observation was accurate. The mechanism was Krebs cycle support, described in pre-modern language as warming the stomach and moving the ki. Here is the part of the Umeboshi story that should have made international headlines but did not, because the finding emerged from Japanese research laboratories, was published in journals that Western health media does not routinely follow, and concerned a remedy that nobody could make money from. Umeboshi has documented antimicrobial properties against some of the most significant pathogenic bacteria that affect the human digestive system. In laboratory studies, compounds extracted from umeboshi have demonstrated meaningful inhibitory activity against Helicobacter pylori, the bacterium responsible for the majority of gastric ulcers, and a significant driver of chronic gastritis that affects an enormous proportion of the Western adult population. H. pylori is not a minor concern. It is estimated to be present in the stomach of approximately 44% of the global population and is the most significant environmental risk factor for gastric cancer. The specific compounds responsible for this inhibitory activity include a class of polyphenols found in high concentrations in umeboshi, and in particularly high concentrations in the red shiso leaves used in traditional umeboshi production. These polyphenols do not kill H. pylori in the way an antibiotic does. They suppress its ability to adhere to the stomach lining, which is the mechanism by which H. pylori establishes itself and causes damage. A bacterium that cannot adhere to the tissue it needs to colonize cannot establish a pathogenic colony. The polyphenols effectively make the stomach environment hostile to H. pylori attachment without the broad-spectrum antibiotic destruction of the beneficial gut microbiome that pharmaceutical H. pylori treatment produces. Umeboshi's antimicrobial properties also extend to several foodborne pathogens, including Salmonella and Staphylococcus aureus, which is why umeboshi has been used in Japan for centuries as a food preservation aid, placed at the center of rice balls to prevent spoilage in the era before refrigeration, and why Japanese school lunch culture historically included umeboshi in packed meals for exactly this reason. The bacteriostatic properties are real, documented in laboratory settings, and consistent with the traditional use patterns that Japanese culture developed through practical observation over hundreds of years. The critical distinction is between what umeboshi does to pathogenic bacteria and what it does to beneficial bacteria. Unlike broad-spectrum antibiotics, which devastate the beneficial microbiome alongside the pathogens they target, umeboshi's antimicrobial compounds appear to be selectively active against pathogens, while being well tolerated by the lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species that constitute a healthy gut microbiome. The selectivity is not perfectly understood at the mechanistic level, but the functional outcome of consistent umeboshi consumption is an antimicrobial intervention that selectively reduces pathogenic bacterial load while supporting rather than disrupting the beneficial ecosystem. This is the property that every pharmaceutical gut intervention has been trying to achieve and has not managed to produce cleanly. Japan found it in a pickled plum. The written record of umeboshi use in Japan begins in earnest in the Heian period, roughly 794 to 1185 AD, when the imperial court maintained detailed records of dietary practices and their observed health effects. Court physicians documented umeboshi as a treatment for digestive upset, as a morning food to prepare the stomach for the day's eating, and as a remedy for what they described as damp gut conditions, a traditional medicine category that maps approximately to what modern medicine would classify as conditions involving excess fermentation, gas production, and sluggish transit. The samurai period extended and popularized umeboshi use in ways that moved it from court medicine into general cultural practice. Samurai campaigns required portable, non-perishable field medicine, and umeboshi served multiple functions simultaneously. Its high acidity prevented spoilage of the rice it accompanied. Its antimicrobial compounds reduced the incidence of foodborne illness in field conditions with limited access to clean water and sanitation. Its citric acid content reduced muscle fatigue, which Krebs cycle biochemistry now explains, but which samurai commanders observed empirically and documented as a practical finding about combat endurance. The Buddhist monastic tradition integrated umeboshi even more specifically into a deliberate health maintenance system. Zen monasteries typically served umeboshi as the first food of the morning, before any other food was consumed, with the explicit intention of preparing the digestive system for the day. Monks living to advanced ages, in conditions of physical rigor and minimal medical intervention, were observed to maintain digestive health through practices that consistently included umeboshi, and the monastic health records that survive from several major temples document this observation explicitly. What makes this 800-year record significant from a modern evidence perspective is not that traditional use constitutes scientific proof. It does not, and it is important to be clear about that distinction. What it constitutes is a very long-running observational study with a very large subject population and a very consistent outcome pattern. When a food has been used for a specific purpose by millions of people across hundreds of years, with consistent reported benefits and no significant documented harms, and when modern biochemistry then identifies mechanisms in that food that are consistent with the reported benefits, the traditional use record is upgraded from folklore to convergent evidence. One samurai practice deserves specific attention. During campaigns with unreliable water sources, samurai dissolved umeboshi in drinking water as purification. The antimicrobial properties were leveraged practically, without any understanding of polyphenols, because reduced gut illness in field conditions made the practice self-reinforcing across generations of military experience. Umeboshi has the traditional use record. The modern biochemistry is now supplying the mechanisms. The convergence is what makes the overall case compelling, rather than merely interesting. The selectivity argument cannot be overstated when placed in the context of what current pharmaceutical H. pylori treatment does. Triple therapy for H. pylori uses 2 simultaneous antibiotics, plus a proton pump inhibitor for 14 days. Studies show gut bacterial diversity takes up to 2 years to recover from that damage. The pharmaceutical search for selective H. pylori treatment without collateral microbiome destruction is ongoing and largely unsolved. This selectivity, if confirmed in larger human trials, would represent exactly what the field has been searching for. Umeboshi has been doing this for 800 years. The modern scientific study of umeboshi is active, primarily in Japan, but increasingly internationally. And the findings are consistently supportive of the traditional use claims, even where the full mechanisms have not been completely characterized. The H. pylori inhibition research has already been mentioned. Beyond that, research on the specific compound mumafuril, which is produced during the processing of yume fruit and is unique to umeboshi and related products, has found significant hepatoprotective effects, meaning compounds that protect liver cells from damage and support liver function. The liver is directly involved in bile production, and bile is a primary component of the digestive fluid that the small intestine requires to effectively break down dietary fats. Impaired liver function produces impaired bile secretion, produces impaired fat digestion, produces the fat-related digestive complaints that a significant portion of the Western population experiences. Muamfural's documented liver protective properties connect directly to digestive function through this pathway. Research on Umeboshi's effect on blood viscosity has found that regular consumption modestly improves blood flow by reducing the tendency of red blood cells to aggregate. This is relevant to gut health specifically because the blood supply to the gut lining is what delivers the oxygen and nutrients that the gut wall cells require to maintain barrier integrity, produce digestive enzymes, and support the immune surveillance that keeps the gut environment healthy. Better blood flow to the gut is better gut function, and the circulation improvements documented in Umeboshi research connect mechanistically to the general gut health improvements that users report. The blood viscosity finding also connects to a documented Japanese practice of consuming umeboshi specifically for travel fatigue, which traditional medicine attributed to stagnant blood circulation, a description that blood flow research now confirms was physiologically accurate. The organic acid profile of umeboshi beyond citric acid includes malic acid, succinic acid, and oxalic acid, all of which participate in various metabolic pathways relevant to cellular energy production and pH regulation. The human gut functions optimally within a specific pH range in each of its sections, and the chronic disruption of those pH gradients, which processed food, antibiotic use, and chronic stress all contribute to, underlies many of the functional disorders that affect the Western digestive system. Umeboshi's extraordinary acidity, delivered in a whole food matrix with buffering compounds that prevent it from simply acidifying the stomach, creates a pH normalization effect that the research is beginning to characterize, and that the traditional use record has been describing for 8 centuries. The research is not complete. The mechanistic picture has gaps. The clinical trials in human subjects are limited in number and in scale. But the direction of the evidence is entirely consistent, and the convergence of traditional use observation with modern mechanistic research continues to strengthen with each passing year of study. The muamfural finding is significant because muamfural exists only in processed ume fruit and cannot be obtained from any other source. It cannot be purchased as a supplement. It cannot be obtained from fresh ume. The only source is traditionally produced umeboshi, which means a food costing $1 delivers a bioactive compound that does not exist in any supplement at any price. Understanding that umeboshi works is one thing. Understanding how Japan actually uses it is the part that most Western encounters with the ingredient miss entirely. And the gap between how it is typically used in Japan and how most Westerners first try it is the gap between something that changes your gut health and something that makes you grimace once and put the jar back in the cupboard. The Japanese relationship with umeboshi is not primarily about eating it as a food in the way you might eat a piece of fruit. It is about a small, specific, daily dose used at a specific time in a specific way for a specific functional purpose. 1 umeboshi per day. Typically eaten in the morning, as the first or one of the first things consumed. Either eaten directly alongside plain rice, which buffers the intense sourness and makes it genuinely palatable, or dissolved into a small cup of hot green tea, a preparation called beiniku ekisu iri osha, which delivers the bioactive compounds in a liquid form that reaches the gut lining particularly efficiently. The size is important. A single umeboshi plum, traditionally the size of a large grape, contains more than enough of the bioactive compounds to produce its documented effects. The mistake most Western people make when they first encounter umeboshi is to approach it like a snack or a condiment, trying to eat several at once or using them as a flavoring for a larger meal. The traditional Japanese practice is one per day at the start of the day, on a nearly empty or entirely empty stomach. 1. That is the dose. That is the protocol. The intensity of the flavor is calibrated to that dose, and the dose is calibrated to the intended functional effect. The rice pairing is worth understanding specifically because it is not arbitrary. White rice is one of the most pH neutral, microbiome neutral, gut lining friendly foods available. It has almost no fermentable fiber that would produce gas. It contains no compounds that irritate the gut lining. It has a soothing, almost coating effect on the stomach lining when consumed as the soft, slightly sticky texture of Japanese rice produces. Eating umeboshi with plain rice is eating the most intensely acidic, antimicrobially active element of the meal, alongside the most gentle, protective, buffering element simultaneously. The combination is not cultural coincidence. It is functional synergy developed through centuries of practical observation about what works. The morning timing is also functionally specific. An empty or near-empty stomach allows the citric acid and the antimicrobial polyphenols to reach the stomach lining directly, without the dilution, buffering, and competitive interaction that the presence of a large food mass would produce. The bacteriostatic effect on H. pylori and the pH modification effect on the gastric environment are both more pronounced when the stomach is not already full of food and digestive activity. Japan's morning umeboshi protocol is timed for maximum contact between the bioactive compounds and the tissue they are intended to benefit. The Beiniku Akisu preparation, dissolving the plum in hot green tea, delivers active compounds to the stomach lining in a fast-absorbing liquid form. Green tea's catechins complement umeboshi's polyphenols. This preparation produces faster onset of gastric effects than the solid food version, which is why it is used specifically for acute digestive distress rather than daily maintenance. Here is the uncomfortable truth about why a food with 800 years of documented use, an active modern research literature, and a cost of approximately $1 sits completely outside the Western medical conversation about gut health. Medical training does not include traditional food medicine. This is not a conspiracy. It is a curriculum. Medical students learn pharmacology, which is the study of pharmaceutical compounds and their mechanisms. They do not learn about citric acid cycle support through dietary umeboshi or polyphenolic H. pylori inhibition through traditional Japanese fermented fruit, because these are not pharmacological topics. They are food science topics that happen to have pharmacological implications. And the division between those two fields means that practicing physicians have almost no formal exposure to the research literature on foods like umeboshi, regardless of how strong that literature becomes. The funding structure of medical research amplifies this curriculum gap. The studies most likely to be funded, published in high-impact journals, and integrated into clinical practice guidelines are the studies most likely to produce patentable, prescribable, profitable interventions. A umeboshi study produces findings about a $2 food that any grocery store can sell without a prescription or a manufacturing license. There is no financial model for translating those findings into clinical practice at scale, and so they remain in the food science literature, where your gastroenterologist is almost certainly not reading them. This is not malice. It is incentive structure. The system optimizes for interventions that the system can monetize, and a pickled plum from a grocery store cannot be monetized at the margins that drive medical research funding and clinical adoption. The result is a knowledge gap that costs the Western population significant health outcomes and significant money, as those same people spend on pharmaceutical interventions for gut problems that an 800-year-old food could address at a fraction of the price and without the side effects. The side effect profile of umeboshi, when used at the traditional 1 per day dose, is essentially non-existent for most people. The high sodium content is a legitimate consideration for people with hypertension or kidney disease who are on strict sodium restriction. The high acidity is relevant for people with active gastroesophageal reflux who are already managing acid exposure. Outside of those specific populations, umeboshi at traditional doses is a food, not a drug, and the safety record of 800 years of daily use by millions of people is more extensive than the safety record of most pharmaceuticals currently prescribed for the gut conditions it addresses. The conversation your doctor should be having with you about your gut health would include fermented foods, dietary fiber diversity, and traditional food medicines like umeboshi that have documented mechanisms and documented traditional use. It does not include those things, largely for the reasons just described. This video is having that conversation instead. Proton pump inhibitors, prescribed for the acid-related symptoms umeboshi addresses through a different mechanisms, are among the most prescribed drugs in the United States. Long-term PPI use carries documented risks, including increased gut infection susceptibility and reduced calcium absorption leading to bone density loss. The food alternative addressing the underlying gastric environment, rather than suppressing the acid response, is not discussed, where those prescriptions are written. 7 sections, 1 compound story. Your gut is dealing with pathogenic bacterial load that umeboshi's polyphenols suppress at the adhesion level, motility problems that its citric acid supports through Krebs cycle substrate, and pH dysregulation that its organic acid profile helps normalize. 800 years of Japanese observation and an expanding research literature now explain why. 1 plum, $1, 3 ingredients. Buy traditional umeboshi labeled with only salt and shiso. Avoid honey, sugar, or artificial coloring. Every shortcut that makes it cheaper eliminates the bioactive compounds that make it work. Tomorrow morning, before breakfast or coffee, eat 1 umeboshi. On plain white rice if the flavor is too intense alone. In hot green tea if you prefer a liquid preparation. 1. Every morning, 30 days without exception. Week 1, the sourness confronts you. Week 2, it becomes familiar. Week 3, something in your morning digestion begins to shift. Week 4, compare where you are to where you were on day 1. Japan has been running this experiment since 794 AD. The results are consistent and now mechanistically explained. $1, 1 plum, 1 morning habit. Japan never stopped while the West built a supplement industry to solve the same problem. Tell me in the comments whether you already knew about umeboshi. I will see you in the next one.